Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating story, the 5-year journey to build a truly revolutionary AI for lending. So let's just start with the big question. How do you actually teach an AI to lend money responsibly? It's a way harder problem than you might think. See, it's not just about predicting who's going to pay back a loan. It's about how you do it fairly, safely, and in a world that is always changing. So we're going to trace the evolution of one company's solution, starting way back in 2020. All right, so to really get our heads around this challenge, we first have to compare the old way of doing things with the new promise of AI. Okay, so on one hand, you have your traditional credit scores. They're simple, right? They've been around for decades. Regulators are totally comfortable with them. They're this safe bet. But on the other hand, you've got AI, which promises this much deeper, more dynamic, almost living understanding of risk. The catch? The technical and regulatory hurdles are just massive. And frankly, they've kept a lot of people from even trying to move past those old, safe methods. So let's get into the timeline and see how this thing was actually built, starting with those early foundational years, where it was all about balancing raw power with some really crucial protections. By 2020, the amount of training data the company had was just growing exponentially. And all that data was like fuel, right? It finally unlocked the ability to use these incredibly powerful neural networks, AIs that are kind of modeled on the human brain. But more power meant way more risk, and that led to a really critical insight in 2021. They realized you can't just unleash these complex algorithms into the wild. So in 2021, the focus completely shifted to building an equally sophisticated AI whose only job was compliance. They had to match the complexity of their lending models with the complexity of their safety systems. This is what let them manage the really tricky stuff, like ensuring fair lending, and this is a big one, being able to explain why the AI made a certain decision, something the old methods could never do. Now we're getting to a really pivotal innovation from 2022, something the CTO actually called a personal favorite. And yeah, it's a little nerdy, but trust me, its impact is absolutely massive. So every machine learning model needs a goal. It's called a loss function. The easiest way to think about it is like a compass for the AI. It's a measurement of error, and the AI's entire job is to try and make that error as small as possible. It's what tells it which direction is better. Now here's the problem. The standard off-the-shelf loss functions are just way too simple for the messy physics of lending. They basically see the world in ones and zeros. Either you default or you don't. And that means they can't tell the difference between a tiny mistake and a catastrophic one. To them, a default in the very first month looks the same as a default on the very last month. When you use that generic goal, this is pretty much what happens. The AI is trying to find that bright red hotspot, the point of lowest error. But its path just kind of wanders around, and it lands in a pretty good spot, this yellow-orange area. It gets close, but it totally misses the actual target. And here's the difference. This is the breakthrough. By engineering a brand new proprietary loss function that understands the financial goal, all the nuances of time and the real cost of errors, the AI now takes a direct path, a beeline, right to the optimal solution. The reduction in error here was just enormous. Okay, so they refined the AI's goal, gave it a much better compass. The next major challenge was teaching it to handle a messy, unpredictable, and constantly changing world. This quote just nails the problem perfectly. Unlike identifying images, which are pretty static, lending patterns are always shifting with the economy. A model that was trained on yesterday's data can become obsolete or even harmful overnight. So, the 2023 innovation was building a system that could adapt on the fly. We're talking about models that could automatically detect a new trend the second it became statistically significant, whether that was across the whole economy or in some tiny little segment, and then respond and adjust, all without any human needing to intervene. Let's jump to 2024 and see how the team decided to tackle one of the oldest and trickiest problems in all of lending. This really is the core problem of what's called adverse selection. It's the risk that the people who are most eager to get a loan are the very same people who know something that you don't, some hidden risk that makes them much more likely to default. The solution here was just incredibly clever. They started feeding the model's own output, the interest rate, the APR, back into it as an input. This allows the AI to spot really suspicious behavior. Like, for example, a person who has a perfect credit profile but is totally fine with accepting a sky-high interest rate. That is a massive red flag for some kind of hidden risk. But this created a new, really mind-bending challenge, a potential infinite loop. To solve that paradox, they had to run many parallel versions of the model all at once. And that, in turn, created a massive new demand for memory and computing power, which forced them to get way, way smarter about optimization. So, to solve that performance bottleneck, the team went deep, down into the low-level code. And they realized their training data was incredibly repetitive. I mean, for a 60-month loan, the borrower's initial credit score was being stored 60 different times. So they figured, why not find a way to just store it once? They ended up inventing a whole new hyper-efficient data structure and rewrote their core algorithms to use it. The result? An immediate 20-fold reduction in how much memory they needed. And that meant they could actually afford the massive computing power that their adverse selection model required. They could make faster, more accurate decisions without having to break the bank on servers. I mean, that's a huge win. And that brings us pretty much to the present day, with a focus now on what comes next and how to unlock even more meaning from the world around us. The latest work for 2025 involves something called embeddings. Now, this is a cutting-edge technique that lets an AI find meaning in unstructured data. We're talking about things like text from a loan application, maybe even audio notes. This just blows the doors wide open to all sorts of new information sources the AI can learn from. So when you look at the whole picture, it's clear this wasn't one single aha moment. It was this multi-year journey of growing sophistication. From just harnessing raw power to guarding that power with compliance, then directing it with a precise goal, making it adaptive, and finally making it incredibly efficient. This whole journey really shows how deep, thoughtful engineering can completely reinvent an industry that's decades old. And it leaves us with one final question to think about. What other systems that we all take for granted are just waiting for the same kind of reinvention?